So welcome, and I'm guessing we will have more people coming in the next few minutes, but that's okay. People will join all along. So this event today is virtual, obviously, because we don't really have a choice. We usually do this event once a year with the association. We always have a green talk or green conference once a year. So this one is like a bit of a first for us to be doing it on a virtual way. But anyway, so maybe just a very quick presentation of who is the Singapore Women Network. So we are a non-for-profit association in Singapore promoting female professionals. And we are one of the only association who will never ask you for a membership fee or things like this. So you are free to join, free to leave. And we do have a very good number of people joining us on a regular basis. We are promoting female empowerment because we think it's really something that that helps every one of us and that we need for both the foreigner community or also to help us mingle more with the locals. So we try to have a good mix of a lot of nationalities and people from everywhere. So this is quite good. What we do on a monthly basis, or what we used to do, is quite focus on networking to help us exchange name cards, exchange stories, and make friends, basically. But because of the COVID, we have been adapting to the virtual format and doing more web conference and discussion panel as what we are doing today. And we will see later about the how can we go back to the networking class. Okay, I think on the presentation of the Singapore Women Network, it's good, and I will probably pass on the mic to Robin so he can present all the speakers.
Hello, everyone. I'm Robin. I'm a journalist for Ecobusiness, and I write about sustainability in Asia Pacific. And I'm delighted to be here today. Thanks so much for having me. So COVID-19 has had a massive impact on our health, society, economy, culture, and the environment. And we're going to be talking about the pandemic's effect on the latter today. While in Singapore we're seeing clearer skies, grassier verges, quieter roads, emptier shipping lanes, we've also seen a surge in single-use disposable plastic waste. Disposable masks and gloves and online delivery packaging have stretched our domestic waste system. Household waste volumes have grown by about 10% this year, and there have been fewer waste workers around to keep the system running. More waste means busier incinerators, which means higher carbon emissions in a country which already has one of the world's biggest carbon footprints per head of the population. Elsewhere around the world, waste has soared too, not just here in Singapore. So the US produced more waste in 2 months than it usually does in a single year. Domestic waste in Thailand increased 4-fold. Hospital waste in Wuhan, where the outbreak started, increased 6-fold during the height of the outbreak. So this pandemic could lead to yet another environmental and public health calamity as plastic waste pollutes our water, soil, and air. So in a minute, I'm going to hand over to Roxanne Zhu from returnable container firm Bearpack, who's going to talk about the link between COVID and the environment. Then we're going to have a panel discussion with Roxanne, Hylin Pett from Zero Waste SG, and Delphine Supanya from Well to Work on the scale of the problem, how changes to our behaviour can help tackle it, and what the future might hold. And of course, we're going to open it up to a Q&A with you, our audience. So first, over to you, Roxanne.
Thank you very much, Robin. So as Robin said, I'm co-founder and I'm CEO of BearPack. We are a returnable, reusable container ecosystem for takeaway, with the goal of replacing the millions of disposables that we use every single day in Singapore alone. And as we will see, has been increasing during this pandemic. So first of all, I'd like to show you this slide. And I'm sure this looks very familiar. Many of you will be thinking of the beginning of the year and the pictures tracing back to China with the disinfections in the stations. But what if I told you that these pictures are actually almost a decade old? And in 2003, the World Health Organization published an update on their website that said, the most pressing question at present is whether SARS will return. And we can say that it has in a way, because COVID-19 is actually a disease caused by a virus that is very similar to that caused severe acute respiratory syndrome. And today we know that since the 6 months since its emergence, we've had over 500,000 deaths. We've had nearly 12 million infections worldwide, and those are just the confirmed cases. But this is not just the second coronavirus that we actually know of. To date, in the last 100 years, we've had over 6 outbreaks from coronaviruses alone. And that's not taking into consideration the outbreaks from other types of viruses or bacteria. What we can notice, though, is that they all have something in common. They all come from some kind of animal reservoir. They've been passed on to humans from animals, or whether they be wild or whether they be domesticated animals. And COVID-19 is no exception. While there are still debates on which animal potentially we have been in contact with, given that there's quite limited close contact still between humans and bats, it's quite clear that it has been transmitted from an animal species that is more likely to be handled by humans and would have contracted it from the wild animals. Now, we actually have a lot of pathogens that we share with animals. It's not new. But when they transmit to humans, that's when we start calling them zoonotic diseases. And they actually infect, it's estimated that about 60% of human infections come from animal origins, and 75% of all new and emerging human infectious diseases in people originated in animals. And this is according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. So as such, they jump from animals to people, so they jump species. They are prevalent around the world, and they can be caused by viruses, but by bacteria, parasites, fungi, and they can cause either mild or very serious illnesses and even death, as we have seen. Like I said, we share many microorganisms with animals, and only a few of these cause diseases. Considering the millions of species of microorganisms on Earth, these pathogens are extremely unusual. About only 1,400 microorganisms are known to cause potential human infection, so that's quite minimal. So when do they become outbreaks? When do they actually cause problems? Well, historically, they've been linked to the emergence of new human diseases from animals, usually associated with major societal changes. We found evidence that actually our hunter-gatherers became sicker when they started moving towards agricultural society, because they were in closer contact with more animals, and they had changed radically their lifestyle. We've also seen this with subsequent plagues and outbreaks associated with societal stresses and upheavals. Think of the bubonic plague. Think of when the Europeans went to the Americas, or even think of tuberculosis, which was associated with industrialization in Western Europe and overcrowding. And you might think, okay, well, these huge major societal changes, we don't really have them today, but we do. We've entered a new era, the Anthropocene. And this comes with a plethora of behaviors that are actually not quite natural and that we're changing dramatically. So the United Nations identifies 7 major anthropogenic drivers of these diseases, the first one being an increasing demand for animal protein. We see that in high-income countries, there is maybe a little change in consumption, but in contrast, Southeast Asia has a rapid increase. These are just percentages of the increase in meat production, milk, and eggs, for example, that is the result of an increase in population and an increase in a wealthier population who can eat more of these products. Then we have the unsustainable agricultural intensification. So we have an increasing demand for animal source foods, as we said, which stimulates the intensification and industrialization of animal production, including the domestic livestock farming, which keeps animals in close proximity to each other, often in less than ideal conditions. And we also know that genetically homogeneous host populations are more vulnerable to infection than genetically diverse populations. So factory farming has seen its own source of diseases. There are many of them that are still recurring today, and animals are treated for them. Then we have the increasing use and exploitation of wildlife, whether it be killing of animals as a source of protein, especially in poorer countries, whether it be recreational hunting, consumption of wildlife because we believe that maybe the meat is better, fresher. This is more of a tradition or a belief. It's more of a cultural thing. But we also have the trade in wildlife, whether it be as pets or for research or medical testing, and then the use of animals for decorative, medicinal, and other commercial products. Another aspect would be the unsustainable utilization of the natural resources, which is also accelerated by urbanization today, land use change as well, and the extractive industries. So when we're going into land to take some of the natural resources, such as oil, gas, and changing what the land was for. Deforestation and fragmentations of ecosystems is a really big one because it encourages contact with human and livestock and wildlife ecosystems. So we actually receive a lot of these potential viruses and problems from domestic animals who are themselves more in contact with wildlife. We have also travel, which seems quite obvious, and I think we can all understand this one really easily just by how fast COVID-19 has spread. People travel faster, quicker, more often. It also makes viruses harder to detect in real time in order to be able to treat people. And it's also unfortunately increased with wild or legal animal trade. So not just the moving of people, but also I would say the moving of foods. If you're importing foods and they could be contaminated, well, they wouldn't necessarily be endemic anymore. They could literally be a global issue. This brings us to changes in the food supply chains, as I've just mentioned. There are increased opportunities for cross-contamination. There are traceability challenges. The changes in how we process our foods as well, we could think that, because it's industrialized, it's safer, but actually there are more opportunities for, microbial ecosystems with biofilms and such in food processing plants. Rapidly expanding our food supply systems as well encourages less than favorable conditions for a lot of wildlife, for a lot of the livestock. And then the last one would be climate change. Many zoonotic diseases are climate sensitive, and some will thrive in warmer or wetter and more disaster prone foreseen in future scenarios. So some pathogens, vectors, and host animals probably fare more poorly under changing environmental conditions, disappearing in some places, which would also result in the loss of certain types of animals as part of a whole ecosystem. And we know that changing the ecosystem is fragilizing resistance. And there's also speculation that this virus may actually survive better in cooler and drier conditions than outside the body. So climate change definitely affects pathogens. We just don't really know how. And this is quite important topic that people are still looking into. So what now? We talked a little bit earlier quickly about, yes, the positive effects, if we can say so, about climate, about COVID-19, especially when we talk about carbon emissions. We've seen pictures, we've all seen this, of clearer skies, whether it be in Beijing or Los Angeles. But, you know, we could also reflect on how temporarily there were clearer skies during the GFC in 2008 because there was less production, but that resulted in an increase in production post this financial crisis as people were trying to recover from an economy that wasn't doing so well. So that's on one side, and then also what about all this waste that we're generating? Maybe we're not seeing the same kind of waste, but we are still generating waste, and a lot of it, and a new kind of waste. And I will hand it back over now to Robin, who will further elaborate on this.
Yeah, just to pick up on what Roxanne was saying about the impact of COVID on the environment, a couple of points is that we've seen polluting, and we have seen clearer skies in Singapore, but where some economies have returned to normal, like China and Vietnam, for example, has actually seen pollution rebound, unfortunately. And also closer to home, we've got, you know, the haze season coming up. And we've also seen, according to some reports, deforestation take a bit of an uptick in Indonesia as monitoring of forested areas has fallen as a result of social distancing measures. So a couple of other points there. But yeah, let's get on to the panel then. I'm delighted to moderate this panel with some really great speakers. First of all, first question actually for Hai-Lin Peck, who's Executive Director of Zero Waste SG, civic society organisation that has a mission to fight waste in Singapore. So Hai-Lin, just I'd love to get your perspective on what sort of impact COVID's had on the waste situation from your perspective, and did you see this sort of tsunami of waste coming? Did you see it coming? Was it a surprise to you?
Yeah. Hi everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Firstly, thanks to Singapore Women's Network for having us this evening. So I hope everyone is doing well. Okay. To answer Robin's question, in terms of whether the waste that we see sort of being incurred now is inevitable, I would say on the medical side, it is not really surprising. Because you know the amount of pressure that has been on sort of the health system because of the pandemic is definitely something that everybody can see. On the other hand, there has been a decrease in commercial waste, like what Roxanne has mentioned just now, due to people working from home as well as lower production levels. On the flip side as well, on the other hand, household waste has increased at least 10%, as well as F&B related waste due to takeaway measures, especially during the circuit breaker period, as what Robin has mentioned. So I don't really see that this is really surprising, because when we know that, we are not able to dine in and we can only do takeaways, definitely sort of we expect to see an increase in the amount of disposals being used, definitely. But I think it is more to do with, so what can we do about that in terms of how people can be more mindful about how resources are being used, as well as the kind of certain strong notions of perceived hygiene standards, tagged to using disposables.
Yeah, so back to thanks a lot, Hai-Lin. Yeah, I'd be interested to see the waste figures for Singapore at the end of the year overall, because while domestic waste has increased, I think, to your point, other sorts of waste has fallen, like in construction, because there's been less construction, that sort of thing. So Roxanne, how do you see it? Have you been surprised by the amount of waste we've seen as a result of the pandemic?
I think something that's maybe interesting to remember is that maybe it's also a question of the waste having shifted sort of where it is. So yes, there has been a dramatic increase in takeaways, But I think there's also been a realization of the waste that people generate because they are at home. So say you were working in your office and you were having a takeaway in the morning on your way, you were grabbing a coffee, then you were going to order takeaway at lunch, and then maybe pop out for something, and then maybe take something home in the evening. A lot of the time you're not in your home. So when you're generating this waste, you're just putting it in the nearby bin or the office bin. And I think that is something that people started becoming a little bit more aware of, and it made a lot of people a bit uncomfortable actually with the waste that they were generating, or at least more conscious. So less waste being generated maybe in the CBD, but it has increased outside of the CBD. So we've also seen that the waste shift. And then some people have resorted to spending more time doing maybe more cooking, more homemade foods. But overall, I would say, no, it's not surprising that there has been an increase in takeaway. It's very much part of the lifestyle in Singapore as well, and it's very accessible. So yeah, I wouldn't say we're surprised. I would say what is interesting is also to think that a lot of people still associate the disposables with being cleaner and safer, which, come to think about it, is it? I'll put this into context for you. When you receive a disposable, you don't really know where it's been before this. You don't know how it's been transported. You don't know much about its manufacturing. Whereas if you go into a restaurant and you're going to eat from the reusable cutlery, you know that they've taken the responsibility of washing it and of making it safe for you to use. It's nothing new that you could have been in a restaurant where someone had the flu or had gastro or had anything unpleasant that you would not want to catch. But you go into the restaurant trusting that the restaurant you go into wants the best for your own well-being. And it seems like we've just thrown all this rationality completely out the door, through the windows, everywhere, and just resorted to, okay, single use must be safer. If somebody has used that single use and has put it in cupboards and stuff without having cleaned their hands beforehand, you could have germs on those too. So it really is a question of maybe rethinking what we consider clean. Transparent plastic is not by default clean. And I think it's the opportunity to educate people on this again, because somewhere along the line, this basic common sense has gotten lost.
Yeah, good point. You'll get onto that in a bit, actually, the argument of single-use versus reusable. Delighted to introduce Delphine Supanya from Well to Work. Welcome, Delphine. So yeah, what sort of experience have you had from the pandemic, and what do you make of the waste situation that's resulted from it?
Hi, everyone. Really delighted to be here. Thanks for the question, Robin. So I live in a very local Singapore HDB in the CBD, actually. And it was really, really interesting because the amount of waste that the whole building was producing, I think, tenfolded. And there are only so few bin containers downstairs. And what I saw and what I also did, actually, was that I started to really clear out my house and I was like, oh, well, I have so much time on my hands, so I'm gonna go and bring down some things that I don't need, and I wasn't the only one doing it. So what really happened was that we would go downstairs, and the bins would just be like the amount of waste was just really incredible. And because of the circuit breaker, people started complaining because it started to smell, and the bin. Like the car trucks that collect the garbage didn't come as regularly, and people started to really ask questions. So they've added a lot more containers now. But then I overheard people talking like in the elevator, and even now it's like, oh, how come we produce so much waste? And what I'm actually seeing around here is people have tried to eat in or bring in their own reusables a lot more because of the lack of space that was downstairs. When you were disposing. And then personally, I went to markets much more often, and because I was so shocked by the amount of waste that was producing cooking 3 meals a day, I was actually a lot more conscious about where I bought what and what I would eat. I started ordering fruits and vegetables that came in a carton box and without any plastic. And I started to research a lot more of that. And then just within also the work that we do, which is educating people within corporations on well-being habits and just taking care of yourself really to not burn out. One thing that we've also noticed is that people really are starting to ask themselves some questions and so started to educate themselves about these themes. So I found it actually all really positive.
Good stuff. Yeah. Hi, Lynn. I'd love to ask a question to you. You, Zero Waste FG, your organisation, launched some time ago a really important campaign called BYO Singapore, where you try to encourage Singapore residents to bring their own containers into stores to eliminate single-use plastic waste. Now, I want to ask you about the impact of COVID on that campaign and more generally on the reuse culture in Singapore. Do you think that some people are saying, that reuse culture has been taken back at least 3-4 years because of the pandemic? I just wanted your point of view on that, please.
Actually, it's really interesting. Obviously, the amount of takeaway or disposal-related waste has increased a lot. But on the other hand, we don't really see, surprisingly, in fact, we don't really see a regression in terms of the reuse culture. In fact, like what Roxanne and Delphine has mentioned, especially when you see the amount of waste that you personally generate, that's one. And then secondly, people in Singapore, they might, online via social media, they might seem to like really oppose the government. But when the government says like something like encouraging, like, oh, we really encourage you to bring your own containers, and coming from a minister that is not an environment minister, it really says something, that maybe this is beyond an environmental issue. And when repeated reminders come from different governmental agencies, not just the Environment Ministry, people start to take notes. And personally, I've also observed more and more people around my estate or near my hawker center bringing their own containers, which I think is really great. But definitely, if you're asking, whether it is in proportion to the amount of waste that's being generated, like the increase in the amount of waste that's being generated, then I would still have to say no. Yeah, the number of people bringing their own are still not that many, but at least there are still more. So I wouldn't say it's regressed. So this is surprising, actually.
Yeah, that's really heartening to hear, actually. Really encouraging to hear if that is the case. Roxanne, back to you. You mentioned a really good point earlier on about reusables versus contamination. There was a study that came out a few weeks ago where 100+ scientists came out and said, look, reusables, if you use basic hygiene, there's no danger of contamination of spreading COVID-19 if you use basic hygiene. So Roxanne, to your point, what's been baffling to me is in Singapore, you've seen some big retailers like Starbucks withdraw the BYO option, whereas Coffee Bean, which is 100 meters away, allows BYO. So there's a real confusion or difference of opinion of this single use versus BYO. So yeah, Roxanne, back to you on that one.
Yeah, I think, in all fairness, businesses just want to avoid people being sick, and they especially want to avoid their own business being associated with the spread of a disease or an illness. I mean, that's very damaging and affect a lot of people. But some businesses, yes, have, I think, looked more in depth into, well, what does a reusable mean, and how could you actually use reusables safely? Like you've pointed out, if you clean things, if you wash your hands, if you sanitize behind every use, there is no reason for the disease to be spreading. I mean, this is why soap exists and why it's still considered today the best remedy for preventing the spread of diseases. You wash your hands with soap, and that will have a lot more effect than any kind of sanitizer that you put on there and just leave there. So it's interesting that some businesses have taken the BYO thing and continued with it, and it's heartening as well. And just back to Hayleen's point, I would say definitely the people who, in general with BYO, have always been advocates of it. They haven't just stopped during the pandemic. They understand that it's safe, that all you do is need to make sure that you clean and wash behind every use. And if anything, they've been provoked by this excess waste that I've seen, and they've wanted to do more, and they've wanted to help more people understand that it is safe. And so I think some businesses have also found a middle ground where they feel a bit safer with it, saying that, you can maybe BYO, but you maybe can't handle the food if there's any area where you could handle the food. For example, there are some bulk stores here. Some of them have decided that you can't bring your own containers. Others have decided that you can, and they just have extra measures, such as if when you come in, they give you some sanitizer, and they would encourage you to ask them to help you refill your jars, for example, so that you're not taking things and potentially spreading anything. Others, if they're using, for example, our partners, we had a lot more partners actually come on board with Bearpack during this period. Potentially because it was indeed sometimes a struggle for disposables and acquiring them, because there have been shortages. Like the ministry has said, please bring your own. It helps us. But also, I feel like a lot of them started to care. They started to see that there is a real value in the reusables, and they have more customers telling them about it. When we ask the partners who join, what is the biggest complaint that you get today? It's not about food quality. It's not about food being hot or cold at the right temperature to be. It's about the amount of packaging that they are wasting. And the consumer obviously still wants to consume this food. It likes this brand. It likes this product offering, but it just wishes it had a better alternative. And so for those brands that were still a bit, we're not too sure on the BYO, we're still worried. And like I said, safety first. We can't blame them for having this apprehension. It's education. When you borrow the Bearpack container, the advantage is that because it comes from their side, it's they've washed it, they've cleaned it, they've put it out. They sometimes feel more comfortable because they're not accepting a foreign or container from somebody outside. So that has been a bit of a mid-ground where some businesses have felt more comfortable, and it's good. It just shows that every business has its own level of comfort, and gradually we will move towards this culture where reusables are just much more part of the norm. It takes both consumers and businesses to realize that it's just as safe. Otherwise, why don't we dine in restaurants in complete disposables? And I know, yes, with COVID, some restaurants have moved away from the reusable cups, like Starbucks for a while, you couldn't have the reusable cups. Now they've put them back in place. I mean, it shows that the logic behind it is you wash, it's clean, it's safe. But it applies to takeaway too. Why is it just restaurants? It's a habit. It's something we've just not yet come round to culturally, but we will.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. So Delphine, you know a thing or two about consumer behaviour. I'd love to ask you about the impact of COVID on consumer behaviour with regards to waste, disposables, and single use. But obviously, we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? There's a lot of fear. What sort of impact do you think that's had on how we consume as people in Singapore, Delphine?
Thank you. Yeah, I think actually, I'm going to talk about this later when I do my presentation. But it's really interesting when you look at how the brain works and how every time you do something once, you do something twice, you do something 3 times, and you feel good about it in the end, you are creating a new neurological pathway. And so in that sense, as people had to adapt out of fear instead of reward, but neurological pathways are still being almost imprinted in our brains, and then we think about it less and less the more we walk them, right? So I think actually the pandemic was quite interesting in the fact that people washing their hands more, people are touching themselves less. I know that we did a class on all the touch points that you'd have in one day, and then it's about 100 touch points if you really think about like how many places you touch. And people are thinking about it more, like, oh, I have an elderly person in my family. I need to be careful to care for them. And so I think, especially because Singapore is Asia, has a very strong Asian culture of respect of elderlies, a lot of the caring values have actually gone up. And so in that sense, yeah, there's so much new behaviors that will be useful long term. Like I was here during SARS. Like I grew up here and I went to school here, and I wash my hands religiously all the time because of SARS 17 years ago now. And so all of the kids that grow up, they're like, oh, I need to wash my hands. I need to make sure I don't breathe on someone else. I need to make sure for the ones that took up the reusables instead of the single use, they'd be like, oh, I'm going to use reusables. And so this is something that will be ingrained because I say, oh, reusable is good. Or, no, actually, you should use single use. So single use is good. So I think we've imprinted ourselves with a lot of new habits that once they're imprinted become automatic, and then they become subconscious. We don't think about them anymore. So depending, I'd be really curious to do a survey and like see, how many people have actually changed them to like something more positive and something more negative.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, good stuff. I want to ask you guys now about, we've touched on a bit, but how businesses have behaved during the pandemic. Kylan, I'd like to ask you first. A bit of context. I wrote a story quite recently about a store called Scoop, which is a sustainable lifestyle store, which now insists that all customers, before they enter the store, they put on disposable plastic gloves. That's an extra measure to prevent the spread of the disease. Now, there's a bit of pushback about that some people are defending the store, saying, hey, that they don't want to get closed down. That they are taking that one extra step to keep people safe. But others were saying, hey, you're a sustainable store, and the science is saying that you don't need to put in these extra measures. So, Hylin, yeah, I'd just love your perspective on how businesses have behaved during the pandemic, and any standouts for you in terms of sustainability.
I think Roxanne has shared earlier about Starbucks, about them sort of disallowing BYO, as well as I think a couple of other bubble tea brands. So that's a little bit disappointing to see. But then again, I guess it's disappointing, but we also kind of have to understand where they're coming from, especially for businesses who decide to err on the side of caution. Because, yeah, even though science says so, but sometimes it's not 100%, like every other day or every other week, they have a new discovery, and then, they might change their statement again. So we kind of understand where they're coming from. On the other hand, those, I guess, are probably, the sort of storefront type of businesses. With hawker centers, personally, I've not been rejected every time I bring my own container, and I think it's great. So perceived hygiene, standards is one thing, even though it is definitely not true, because the viruses stick anywhere. They don't definitely exclude themselves from disposable containers. Yeah, so as long as we keep it clean, we keep our reusable containers clean, it's fine. The other hand, I think, to add to Roxanne's point, is that a lot of the businesses, they are probably more open to taking up maybe reusable container options, as well as welcoming BYO because of supply chain issue. And when cost is involved, sometimes they don't think much about it. They're like, we just want to accept your reusable containers because it is a cost issue on us as well. And if we transfer that cost to consumers, the consumers are not going to be happy. So as much as sometimes we see that, bringing reusable containers is supporting the environment, we are also generally supporting our local businesses, keeping costs low in the long run, hopefully. And there are a lot of other, domino effects, socio-economic as well as environmental factors involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, Roxanne, anything else you'd like to add to that? Add on to Hylin's points?
I think yes, they're very valid. The costing comes back frequently, especially I would say now that a lot of them had to shift their business models a little bit. It's really, especially if you were in the CBD and you had a lot of foot traffic that was coming from the offices, you maybe didn't have any takeaway. And the difference now is that those who didn't, and we saw it quite clearly, those who didn't have any delivery system in place struggled immensely. And it was almost like a lot of the businesses were keen to try new things, whatever it could be, that could potentially help them, whether it be help them because it's reduced costs, help them because it's a new opportunity, it's maybe a new market or a new type of customer. We had two sides, which I found was really interesting. There was the side of, well, we don't know where to start. This thing is so big, it's changed our routine and our lifestyle so much. What do we do now? And who felt like the priority was just, selling their food. And so packaging is an issue, but, their priority remains, how do I make enough sales? That was number one priority, and it's quite hard to talk to businesses about the environment in those conditions and in those situations because they need to maintain the business. And then those who were in a slightly better position, who found maybe exactly who they should be delivering to or exactly whom to work with for deliveries, or who found support in a local community. I'm thinking of a few maybe smaller outlets that had, really strong customer base who were very loyal. And they were more open to discussions and how can we change our packaging? Because they came from a place where they had the ability, I think, mentally to think about other things. So it was also interesting to see that not everybody was on the same journey towards reducing packaging waste, whether it be for the same reasons or just because they had the other priorities at that time. Like I said, making your sales was and still is number one. So I think that was a reality that we couldn't escape during this period. That first and foremost is make the business work, sustain the business, then think about how do you accommodate to reduce your impact on the environment.
Yeah. So how do you think, over to you, Delphine, how do you think that this pandemic is going to change the way that businesses should talk to their customers in terms of waste, in terms of the environment? Obviously, it's had a big impact on all sorts of society, but how will that messaging change, do you think? How are you going to talk differently to your clients and customers now?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I'm actually going to answer from like the more corporate side. So linking your question just now with the previous one, which is like what we've seen and the work that we've been doing more actually is to like very big corporations were like, oh wow, all of our employees are now working from home. Engagement will lower. All of the activities that we had for them, including any sustainability activities that were done in person, will no longer be done or have to be done through webinars. And so rethinking of how to keep everybody safe in their jobs and making them feel safe and keeping them engaged. We've actually had so there was an increase in well-being and communication, but however, there was also an increase in reviewing sustainability policies within their corporations. And I've seen so many campaigns now where it's like, okay, so from next year when we go back into the office, you're all going to get reusable cups, and they were considering, we're going to use less paper and we're going to be more conscious about our environment. And so I think, how businesses are communicating, like how with their employees, has completely changed actually, where any sustainability or measures that are engaging, that make us feel engaged as employees and cared for actually are going up, and it's definitely for the benefit of everything that we all do, and we're all interested here.
Great stuff. Well, thanks to everyone on the panel. That was brilliant. And back to you, Delphine, to talk a bit about consumers and the impact of the pandemic there.
Okay. Let me share my screen.
Do you want me to share your content, Delphine?
Oh yes, that would be brilliant.
So that we avoid the issues.
Thank you.
Okay, let me. Okay, you should see my screen now, right?
Yes, amazing. Thank you so much.
Okay, So what we can do is like I will try to go with you following the flow, and or you let me know if I have to go to the next one.
Brilliant, thanks so much. So hi again, everyone. My name is Delphine, and I set up a consulting company called Well2Work to make well-being accessible to all. And today I'm going to talk about habits and the secret to creating new ones and really keeping them where they are. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So habits is a very interesting thing. So during the pandemic, I actually noticed that I was being even more conscious of like the waste that I was producing, as I mentioned before, and I was living with someone who wasn't conscious at all. So it was a really interesting dialogue that we had, and in between that we had to come to, and it was very interesting also to see like, hey, how do I feel when I'm using plastic, and how does she feel when she's using plastic? How does it make me feel when I see that? And how did she feel when she saw me caring for it so much? And so from a social perspective and from a consumer perspective, it was really, really interesting. And so if we can move to the next slide. So yeah, things that we do automatically are habits. Once, as I mentioned before, once they become once we do something several times and there's a positive reward at the end, there's a part of our brain, like the thinking part of our brain, and our prefrontal cortex moves out, and then a little bit in the middle of our brain called the striatum releases chemicals that will then inhibit the prefrontal cortex from thinking, and any habit becomes automatic, moves to our subconscious, and it will take us much less energy to actually repeat the same behavior over and over again, because it's just ingrained in our brain, and I'm going to explain later how that mechanism works. And so during COVID, consumers, can we please stay on the same slide? Thank you. So during COVID, as we already mentioned, we've seen like there was an increase in waste, and some people might have used more jars, gone to Scoop in Singapore to actually fill out the jars, but then noticed that you had to use plastic gloves, and ordered a lot more online, right? And online ordering creates so much more waste, doesn't it? And so what do we do with that waste, and how do we feel about it? It's a question that you really have to ask yourself to start creating awareness of your behaviors. And that's really the ingredient number one in understanding habit, and how to use like the power of creating new ones to change your behaviors. And so if we can move on to the next slide, I put on 2 photos, about good and bad habits, like driving and riding a bicycle. Like I know that before CB started, all of the cycling shops in Singapore sold out of all of their bikes, which is also very interesting, because people are like, oh well, I'll be stuck at home, I won't be able to drive anywhere really, and so I'm going to buy a bike, and I was cycling around Marina Bay and all the way up to East Coast and Changi here from the CBD, and the roads are really, really full with people. So if you're turning on your judgment, the judgment part of you that judges a habit as good or bad, we could say that this is a good habit because your carbon emission is decreased, and you're exercising. And when we exercise, we actually release chemical reactions into our body that actually create more brain matter. Isn't that amazing? And I'm going to go and return to this point later on today. So if we go now to think about how our brain works. So for instance, when you learn how to ride a bicycle or drive a car, at the beginning it was an effort, and you needed to repeat and repeat and repeat, and at some point it became an automatism. And actually, if you really think about it, when it becomes something that is subconscious and automatic, like the time between the start and the automatic behavior is actually not that long. It takes effort, like at the beginning, it's like, oh my God, this is so hard, I'm so afraid, I'm so scared. But the more you do it again and again and again, the easier it becomes, right? So this is a road. So this is an image that represents the starting point, which is a red dot. And then if you walk the same pathway, or cycle the same pathway, or drive the same pathway over and over and over again, what your brain does is you'll be driving, for instance, your car or riding your bicycle, and you'll be able to talk to your neighbor or whoever's sitting in the car with you, listen to music, think about what you're going to do today without having to actually consciously think about the driving or the cycling itself, right? So this is really how our brains work, and this is really a superpower that we have, and there's something amazing called neuroplasticity, and that's the ability for the brain to completely rewire itself. So whatever habits you have today that you're judging and you want to change, with a little bit of motivation and awareness, you can rewire yourself to form a new one, whatever that is. So if we're moving on to the next slide, here are the 3 secret ingredients to creating a new habit. So you have a trigger, a behavior, and a reward. So a cue triggers a behavior that is then followed by a reward, and anything that we do actually, positive or negative reward. So for instance, every morning your alarm clock rings. So it could be a physical clock, like in my picture, or your phone. So that's the trigger. You're like, oh, my alarm clock rings. So your brain goes, alarm clock rings. Behavior is, I'm going to punch the snooze button. I do it. I think all of you do, especially during circuit breaker, and all of us were home, we snooze more than we would have actually if we had to actually go to work. And I know we ran a little study about this, and then it was really interesting. And so then once you punch the snooze button, the reward is you going back to sleep and getting 9 sweet extra minutes of sleep. Okay, so that's the whole cycle of creating a habit. You do that every morning, your brain will just expect that you'll be able to sleep 9 minutes more, and then sometimes we snooze a lot more. So if we move on to the next slide, the more you repeat a behavior, inside our brain, we have 100 million neurons that fire all the time. They fire electricity all the time. It's like the super highway of information and that travels from point A to point B to point C. And how our brain works is that it starts to analyze the reward system of all of our habits, and it will create a hierarchy of the habits using one single point, which is the reward. So the bigger the reward, the most amazing the reward, the stronger the habit. So if you eat sugar or you go to the hawker center and you get your favorite dish, I'm gonna say gula melaka, and it comes in like lots of plastic, right? It comes in a cup with a bag and maybe also a straw. Well, your brain is like, oh, I'm gonna get gula melaka, and I'm gonna get this rush in my brain of chemicals, and it's a combination of a lot of different chemicals. And then you have this habit, and if you do this every Monday, same time, you will constantly feel the craving. And what happens in your brain is that actually your behavior will start even before you get the reward, because it's like your body will be like, oh, it's almost 3 o'clock, like gula melaka time, and all of the chemicals in your brain will start firing. All of these things in your body will start happening, and you will start to automatically, subconsciously move yourself to, put your shoes on, go to the elevator, walk to the hawker center, and get your gula melaka, right? So this is really something to be very, very aware of. And so if we now move on to the next slide and consider all of our behaviors, so some of you might have a list of things that you would like to do. Some behaviors you would like to change, and some you would like to let go of, some you would like to keep. So the strategy actually is to keep the behavior that you like the most. So for instance, I'm really, really proud of the fact that I produce about 2 bags of waste per week. And I'm really proud of this, right? And it makes me feel really good, and I'm motivated to continue doing it, and I'm wanting to reduce it, although I'm finding it quite challenging now being at home most time. And so I'm using I'm using the cue, which is I'm ordering a box of food that comes without plastic, and then the behavior is I get to eat, and the reward is food. It's actually, oh my God, I'm going to get to eat this super amazing food. And on top of that, I have a second reward, which says, well, I'm going to produce less waste. So if you take any habit that you have that you love and just reprogram any other old habit that you've got, you will start to be creating, like we're seeing on this picture, a lot of new neurological pathways. So what that means is any road that was automatically traveled before will still be running in your subconscious, But by consciously reprogramming another habit, by giving the same reward as something that you actually really enjoy doing, you will start to create new pathways. And after a very short period of time that requires effort at the beginning, you will create an entirely new habit. Isn't that great? And then it becomes really automatic. The more you do it, the more new habits you create, and you can actually create and change your entire life. This type of awareness actually helps you take care of yourself better. It will actually also expand to how you communicate. So for instance, me, how I communicated with my housemate, I was judging her plenty. I was judging her so much for using so much plastic. I know, and inside I would be like, and that was my habit. That was my automatic, all of my triggers, you know, that were happening, judging her. And so every time I saw her come back from the supermarket with all of these plastic bags, I'd be like, well, everything would just happen. And then I would get upset. And then that's poisonous for me, right? So how did I reprogram this? I used the same process of me being super proud of producing only 2 plastic bags a week, to how I communicated with her, to how I saw her, to now understand that that's her choice, and what she does is in her scope, and what I do is in my scope. And so over time, you just positively reinforce your felt experience of every single reward and change your habits. Just like when we train a dog, we give it treats. It's the same system. So moving on to the next slide. Just reinforcing again, you know, to create new habits, be aware. Just be very aware of what you're already doing and what you want to change, and just carve out these new roads. It's like, you know, it's like you have a mountain, there's a field of grass, and it's never been walked. Just walk the same pathway over and over again, and it will imprint. We'll keep imprinting a pathway, and then no grass will grow on that pathway because it'll just be really easy to travel. And so, yeah, think about times you were successful. So moving on to my last slide, I want to talk about something really amazing that I mentioned before, which is some tools and practices actually help us reset our brain, help us create more neurons that we can then capitalize on and gray matter, so that we can shave off some of the old habits that we don't like and create new ones, and it makes it much easier. And my 3 favorites are exercise. So actually running and exercise brings so much oxygen to your brain. It's so many chemical reactions happen. I don't have time to go into them, but you can call me later or message me if you want to know more. There's a lot of science on this. It just restores your brain, and it allows you to get rid of all of the stuff that you don't need, so that you can create a new one. The other one is meditation. It's been proven now, so many studies that you produce more gray matter, and actually coming back to how you feel, your felt experience. Meditation really helps you get into that state of being where if you think you're going to do something positive is going to come out, and you're actually giving yourself a self-rewarding loop instead of being negative and criticizing and like I was looking at my housemate and judging and criticizing her for her behavior. Once I started praising her for the effort she was making and using 1 plastic bag less every week or every month, you know, everything started changing for me as well. And the third one is smile. Okay, so if you actually put your tongue out, smile the biggest smile you can actually, and smile a genuine smile from the inside of your body. Our brain doesn't know a difference between a real and a fake smile. It doesn't know the difference between a smile you just did and a smile that was actually called by someone or something that was lovely. And so what then happens is you're changing the chemistry in your brain, and you're actually adding a reward system. So I have a dog. I'm teaching her lots of things these days, and I give her a treat. How I see it for us as humans is, and whenever I do something that I'm proud of, I smile, and I hold my smile for about 60 seconds to 3 minutes. And as I'm running out of time, as the exercise we're going to do together, so that you can take away something to change your habits, whatever they are, like from now on, and then just keep them. And before we do that, just one last point, which is a lot of people's habits changed, a lot of your habits, a lot of my habits changed during COVID and the circuit breaker. And a lot of them are amazing. And so a lot of people think, oh, what's the new normal? Are we going to go back to what we had before? And actually, if you look at how our brain works, that's not really possible. You can't go back to whatever you did before if you've put on all these new pathways already, which are think about your consumption, get less plastic, and all of that. Okay, so find a comfortable seat. Like if you're sitting on a chair, bring your bum cheeks to the edge of your chair. Have your legs out in a V shape, feet flat on the floor, and if you look down, you should be able to see your feet, not behind your knees, but in front. And just sit upright and close your eyes and just play with me. And put your tongue to the roof of your mouth, start smiling and breathe in and out through your nose. And just keep smiling, you're stretching your face. We're going to do 60 seconds. Take a moment and just notice how your body, something is changing. And how you're changing your chemistry. Just like that. Keep smiling, hold it. A few more seconds. Release and blink your eyes back open. That felt good, right? Yeah. See? And now I'm smiling even more. So this is really something that you can do. You can teach your children, or do with your family members. Is just smile a lot more. And when you change your new habit, smile about it, and that reward will go a long way in changing all of your habits. Thank you.
Great stuff, Delphine. Really enjoyed that. Brilliant presentation. Yeah, if you can get out of the habit of single use, as convenient as it is, that would be great for everyone. I guess smiling more often would work too. So yeah, I'd love to, next bit, I'd love to get on to think a bit about the future. I'd love to ask Hai-Lin in particular about the future of waste in Singapore, which is something I'm sure you've been thinking about a lot. Personally, I'm a little bit cynical about Singapore's approach to waste management. From one perspective, take, for example, the targets to reduce waste. The government wants to reduce waste by 30% per person by 30%, by 2030, sorry. By that time, the population is expected to grow from 5.8 million to about 6.6 to 6.9 million. So with those sort of targets, I'm not sure that waste is going to come down by that much. Anyway, that's just me, that's my perspective. So I'm not that hopeful, but I'd love to ask you, Hai-Lin, how hopeful are you about the future, and what do we need to do to tackle our big waste problem in Singapore?
Thanks for the statistics, Robin. It sounds a little bit bleak. I'm just thinking that if we start now, if we start to put reinforcements now in terms of infrastructure, educational, I don't think any single solution can work on its own. It all has to come together in different ways. That's where the idea of collective action is needed. And that's why we repeat it so many times. Okay, we really need collective action, and everybody has their own role to play. It doesn't matter what you're doing, where you are, where you come from, what your role in society is. No matter what you do, you can make a difference somehow. So if we start to put in these reinforcements, whether it is policy reinforcements, infrastructure, education, when it comes in place, hopefully by 2030, when the population increases to I don't know what extent, at least we are on the path to ensuring maintaining a certain level of waste production, or we could curtail it to a certain extent. Yeah, so I'm kind of on the fence about this. No,
I'm a little bit pessimistic about it, but that's just me. But yeah, no, some important things have been happening, right, that do point to a brighter future. For example, Singapore is the first country in Southeast Asia to think about introducing extended producer responsibility laws, right, which make the companies that make plastic or use plastic responsible for collecting it and disposing of it, right? So I'd just like to ask you about your hope for those sorts of regulations and the impact they might have in Singapore to reduce our waste problem.
Yeah, so actually that was what I was like kind of referring to when I was talking about policy and infrastructure.
Yeah.
So quite excited to see it unfold. Hopefully it does not get any pushback. As of now, there isn't really any official pushback except for the mandatory reporting for packaging for certain industries. Yeah, but that's for 1 year, so they're expected to report, like start coming in with the reports next year or sometime next year, hopefully. So really excited about them stepping up in terms of the EPRs when we look at e-waste as well as certain packaging waste. I'm particularly interested in how the government will implement the deposit refund scheme for bottles. Yeah, how much a premium they would expect the public to pay, and how much the public, would get back then in return, and what kind of reactions there would be from different communities. That would be really interesting. In the meantime, I think from us, we really, really just need to try our best to educate and spread the message as much as possible. People, like what Delphine said, I guess we don't need people to, be really enthusiastic and support you, but at least we need to neutralize them. I think once we neutralize them, it actually sort of just creates the path to, better policies and things and changes to come.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get on to Q&A in a minute, where we'll open up to questions from the audience. If you guys have any, do write them into the Q&A box if you have a question for our esteemed panelists. Just quickly, Delphine, Roxanne, vision for the future from the waste perspective. How do you see things panning out, and how hopeful are you for the future from the waste perspective in Singapore?
Yeah, I would say that yes, it's nice to see that there are policies being put into place, and I would definitely agree. I mean, what Helen says is everybody has a different responsibility, and everybody has to do something. There's a lot of expectations put on government that if the government put in place something, then we would be in magical land and everything would get fixed, especially in a small country like Singapore, where the government, after all, does have a lot of influence and can initiate change really quickly. I mean, that is one very positive thing about Singapore, that we have this advantage over other countries to manage our waste. So we might not have the local disposition to be able to do recycling per se, or transformation of materials, or something that people kind of confuse, that we do sorting here in Singapore of waste. We don't actually convert the majority of our materials. And so having the reduction plans in place is the most important step. I personally am a little bit less optimistic about the bottle return scheme. It seems that rewarding people for returning a waste is maybe not as effective as if this was a cost that is added to the product, and so it's a natural thing to be able to return it. It's not like you're getting extra money from it, it's been an extra cost. So it might actually reduce people buying in the first place. And I think that's what makes the successful return schemes, I think that's what they're based on. It's a consignment that is kind of really costed into the product at source, which is not what we have today. So maybe we don't quite yet have the whole picture on how that should work. I've seen the machines in Sentosa. I was a bit naughty. I wanted to see if it would accept an aluminium can. It did not. It recognized the bottle, but I didn't see anybody else using it. And there were, there were enough people around with plastic bottles who could have tried recycling their bottles. So again, how is this really scalable? Like, how many of these return places would we need for it to really work? But I do see that, yes, the ground movement of people wanting to use more reusables that are at home, I do think that more people do it, more people see it, then we can expect it to be put into place more. Extended producer responsibility is quite hard for various reasons. The number one being they don't know where it goes to. And it's very hard to force people to help recover this waste. I won't go into detail about that, but it's a great thing, but it might just be making businesses pay a lot of money for things that it's very hard for them to recover at the end of the day. Or potentially it could be leading people into more of a rental scheme that could help producers recover stuff, but that's obviously not viable for every product. If it's a packaging, it'll be very hard. Yeah. So pros and cons.
Interesting, yeah. So yeah, pros and cons. Delphine, how hopeful are you for the future?
I'm actually, I'm more on the positive side of things, right. As the nature of my work. But like for me, you know, it's change is like 1% at the time every day. If everybody can do 1% every day, that's a lot of percentages. If like 6 million people do 1% every day, right? So I agree with Hylin, like keep educating people. I love that Singapore has the Zero Waste initiative. You know, eco-business is great, and Roxanne, like you're doing great work as well, and driving reusability. So I think in a place like Singapore, in encouraging initiatives like this, I have not seen this anywhere else where it's so fast, it's picked up so quickly, and I find it really, really positive. And considering Singapore is so young as a country and has actually even just started thinking about waste I would say at a very early point in the development of the country itself, and it's actually also quite recent. So, you know, like I lived in Germany for a long time, and they've been thinking about this for, oh my God, I don't even know how long, maybe it's in their genetics, I don't know. You know? like this eco-consciousness seems to be ingrained in them, and in Singapore, considering the neighboring countries, it is not ingrained, and what they're doing here is just really amazing, and I'm just really excited to see everything else that will pop up and then happen here and accelerate it in Singapore, because I guess it's a place where this is possible, you know, to accelerate things.
Yeah, absolutely right. I'd agree with that. If any country can do it and make change happen quickly, it's Singapore, right? Absolutely, from that perspective, sure. Yeah. So before we get into Q&A, if anyone's got any questions, please do type them in the Q&A box. Oh yes, we have a question here. If one of you guys would like to take it. Okay. Yeah, a bit of a controversial one. It seems that in Singapore, the activity, I guess by activities I mean work to reduce waste or tackle waste, is done more by NGOs than the government itself. Hylin, would you like to take that tricky question? There you go.
I realized that I think it's probably the impression, because we kind of put ourselves really out there, and then for us, for one, our main target audience is the public. So I wouldn't say that the government didn't do anything. Actually, they have done quite a bit, and like what Robin has shared, they are actually putting in place quite a few extended producer responsibility where they have the industry side of things. So there are a lot of things and R&D going on, and research going on behind like the scenes that we don't really see, and they don't really. And our government is rather conservative in a sense that if they're not really sure of the solution, or they're not 100% sure that it will work, they would rather just not say anything at all. And a lot of things there are many things that are like brewing at the back of the scenes. Besides policy, also trying out different technologies, innovations, different types of like sort of recycling schemes, things like that. Owning the recycling process. Of course, we try to push for reduction. That is key. So if you say that the government is not doing anything, it's not really true. In fact, their favorite and the first aspect that they will tackle is the industry, because to them it's the easiest. Yeah. And yeah, so I would say on the people side, we kind of are really tempered in that sense. Yeah. So yeah, I would say we are targeting at different sort of different groups and different community groups. But at the end of the day, everything should come together. And yeah, we definitely should push for the government to nudge the public to do more, and vice versa, industry-wise as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The government seems to just be quite on the cautious side when it comes to setting targets, right? Sets targets that it doesn't want to miss. The same thing with same thing with climate, right? We'll achieve net zero sometime after 2050. You know, he doesn't want to commit. But so another question here for Delphine, actually, back to habits in the example of cars versus bicycles. Depending on the perspective, the car may seem the best option for people using it. How can we diversify the message regarding waste? How can we diversify the message regarding waste so that we give new meanings to people to jump on these habits? You got that question?
Thank you, Alice. I guess, you know, what I've been doing personally is to just remind people that when they take a bicycle and when they exercise, they're doing things for themselves. Like, ultimately, people only care about themselves first, and then they will care about the environment and waste and all of these things once they're provided for and their self-care is put into place. And for instance, we do these talks about diet and being a vegan business. Like, we only recommend plant-based recipes and dishes and make it really accessible. And then we say, you know, if you want to add animal products, here's the carbon footprint, and you can add it to the recipes that are nutritiously dense. And so to the car and the bike example, we do the same. It's the same approach. It's like, well, you know, I take my bicycle because all the way to Changi Port almost, because hey, it keeps me fit. It allows me to come ahead. It produces more neurons. I feel great. And now I have this super backpack that here is where you can buy it, that I put on my back, and I can go shopping. And I think having a positive message and showing how you're benefiting from it inspires others to be like you and healthy and self-care. And so I think that's like a really beautiful approach in educating people by inspiring them to be more like you, actually. And yes, cars are convenient. Like, even today I was walking outside and there was only one person in each car, instead of when we used to have grab share or when we used to carpool a lot more. And then I was really shocked by it. I was like, oh my God, wow, this is there are less cars in Singapore driving around. It's one person per car. So these people were like, hey, you know, instead of sitting around, you know, and one thing that really works is give the example from the I perspective instead of you, because once you point fingers at people, they stop listening. So talk about yourself, like, oh, I do it and I feel great, and emanate that, because they will feel it and they will want it, and the brain will be like, oh, reward, love, let's do that too, and they might try it out.
That's a great strategy. Question from, I'll put to you, Roxanne, if that's all right.
Sure.
Question that's come in from Penny. She says that here in Asia, she's surprised at how few news articles there are on climate change and environmental issues. Please read Eco-Business in that case. But her point is that, you know, there's so much coverage, international coverage of the Australian bushfires, but by comparison, there isn't as much stuff on Asia.
Yeah.
How do you think we can change that and increase communication regarding climate change? Or do you think there's already enough communication on the topic?
I think there's never enough communication on the topic, because until people realize that it affects them every single day of their lives and of their children's lives, of everyone's lives, I don't think we can communicate enough. The key maybe to the communication is also the tone that we use. It's really difficult to find the right tone. If it's all doom and gloom communications, and we've seen so much of it with the Australian bushfires, like you said, or the Amazonian forest, like, people then start to switch off. And we obviously don't want that. There's no point putting out information out there if, you know, if you open your WeChat, Waiting, or any kind of feed that you have, and you see negative stuff in climate change, it doesn't encourage people to do positive actions towards mitigating it. So, but then if it's all like happy news on what you can do and how it's never too late, and then people also start to not take the problem seriously. So I just want to touch upon that, because it's actually really hard to find good news that are informative, that make people want to change, and are about a really serious topic. So number one, just want to put that out there. Number two, so no, we don't communicate enough on it. I am not involved in politics, so I don't want to say if this is one of the reasons, but you can assume that, you know, there are a lot of things that happen in this part of the world, like deforestation and stuff, that typically people would not go out and talk about because political interests and conflicts. But these do cause huge problems when we talk about mitigating, our carbon sinks, for example, and we all know that how important they are for mitigating climate, temperature rising. I would say climate change is too broad. So that's one example. The other thing could be that we don't see, apart from the deforestation, we have not had the same sort of events as we've had of burning Australia and all these really visible dramatic events. They kind of are very dramatic here. Like we do have changes in our oceans and our ecosystems, but we as Singaporeans living here, at least as citizens, we don't really see this. We're used to high, humid temperatures. We're used to not really having climates like varying seasons, right? So yes, we've noticed there should be a wetter season, a drier season, whatever, but it's not as stark a contrast as a country that suddenly is having no winter or having no summer. And we are in a very artificial environment. Most of us live in air cons or at least with fans every single day. So I feel like we are particularly disconnected with climate change. We also don't cultivate our own food. Most of our crops are imported. So if you are growing crops and you're very subject to the elements, you will notice this a lot more. So it'll come up in the news, like we've had a shortage of apples, or we haven't been able to grow, like in France, where I come from, when we have massive hailstorms that are unprecedented and they destroy all of the grapes. This comes in the news. Climate change comes again. So because these things affect our lives, like directly, we talk about them. And I feel like we don't yet have this in Singapore. That could be one reason. I can't speak to the other countries. I think it's really Robin is going to have a much better answer to this question, I think, than I am. But that would be my assumption and observations, that we are not so impacted, also we don't think, and also political climate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, writing a story about sustainability, you just always worry about it being depressing or boring, and you just need to find that balance, right? To give so readers don't get turned off and lose all hope, right? So yeah, it is a tough one. I actually missed the question, so I'd like to put to you, Hailin, a good one from Mariana. When do you think supermarkets will stop giving plastic bags or charge for them? It's one of the classic questions that people have been asking for perhaps a decade. And in fact, a theory was that the government wouldn't introduce a charge before the election, because it might prove very unpopular. That's a theory, at least. So Hailin, will we ever see a plastic bag charge or move towards charging for plastic?
As an organization, we are definitely very supportive of a charge, and I think we have been trying to pursue this, I think, for the past 2 years, ever since Eugene, our founder, has written a position paper on recommendation of plastic bag charge. When, I cannot really answer that, but as opposed to what Robin has said, we were not expecting the plastic bag charge to happen before the general elections, because it's a bit contentious to say this, but probably certain demographics within the community really love and are very defensive about their plastic bags. So yeah, we probably have to. So probably they choose to err on the side of caution for this. But moving forward, we will definitely try to see whether there are any other opportunities to push for it, and we want to be strategic about it as well. So working with the government as well as gaining their trust is one, but on the other hand, as consumers, please do not ever underestimate your power. So just continue to write in to various supermarkets to tell them, like, hey, we really want to see a charge, we really want to see you do something about it. And at the same time, if they actually put in any effort, like FairPrice is still in the middle of their plastic bag trials for certain outlets, do also praise them and say, hey, we would like to continue to see you doing that, so that they do not feel like, if there are no praises from the public, or, I always get scolded by certain customers, I would not want to do it anymore. So actually, the supermarkets serve us, so their priority is us and what we think. So we really need to put that our message and what we think across to them as well. And it can be as simple as a Facebook message. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We've almost run out of time, have we? I'd love to ask all of our panelists actually if they'd like to give a takeaway message. That's something that they'd like our audience to go home with, if that's all right.
I have two more. Sorry, Robin. I have two more questions actually from the chat.
Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. I didn't see them. I might have missed them.
Yeah, no, I think it was only given to me. So I have one, Miriam. She was sharing that she was having a conversation with her dad about the sustainability of using reusable for delivery and takeaways in the F&B industry. And her dad mentioned that it's not really realistic due to the greater effort required for maintenance, and it's not cost efficient. Hence, many businesses don't see why they should implement that. So I think the question was more for Roxanne.
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure what you meant by not cost efficient for businesses, because if you're looking, I'll speak for myself here, but if you're looking at a service like Bearpack, we're actually free for the businesses to implement. So I'm not quite sure what that was, like from what standpoint that was. It could be reflecting on a different model, I'm not sure. I think it's the way we put it in place. There are some really idealistic views of a circular economy, of, having collection points all over the place, and they would be maybe a bit hard to maintain per se. But if everybody can be an actor in the circular economy, then it does make sense. So, if you can return a container to some place that has a washing facility, the container doesn't have to travel across half of Singapore to get washed, then it does make sense. And the logistics aren't as complicated as they would appear. Obviously, there could be ways to make it even simpler, and that requires more partnerships. You don't solve a problem by yourself, and no one company, one business is going to solve everything. You need to work together, and then you can find a viable way. I'm not saying it'll happen tomorrow. I also hope that there are more consumers that see that it's possible and that are optimistic enough to help businesses move towards this solution. Because like Shaylin said, the customers drive a lot of the changes and the good actions that businesses take and make.
Thank you. And one last question. Being sustainable is often touted as being only accessible for the more privileged in society. For the less privileged, especially developing countries where people are more concerned with basic needs for survival more than anything, it's not very realistic to ask them to reduce the use of one-time plastic, for example, especially since packaged and processed food and necessities are usually cheaper. So how can we address this issue, recognizing that the socio-economic inequalities in society are the one that perpetuate this issue?
Interesting.
I think this one is for like all the panelists. So whoever wants to jump in.
I would say for them, honestly, their carbon footprint should be much lower, or would be much lower than many people in the developed countries. So because generally they use way less than people in developed countries. So their carbon footprint is already much lower. So when it comes to environmental sustainability, we definitely should look beyond just plastics, because there are many areas in which we could change and we need to transform. So for example, if I'm a vegetarian, but I order the occasional delivery and I incur disposables, my footprint would still be lower than someone who don't use disposables at all but eats beef all the time, for example. So So it's kind of this holistic view of what sustainability means. And so therefore, I think that as people living in developed countries, there's a lot more that we should be doing, that we could be doing. And also, how can we aid them in terms of social justice so that they can also achieve environmental justice. That's it.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind jumping in there as well, actually. Just from my perspective, having written about this a bit, I think it's quite irresponsible of a company, say if you're Coca-Cola or you're Unilever, to launch your products in a country like Myanmar, which has underdeveloped recycling facilities or waste collection facilities. I mean, you're ultimately trashing that country. I mean, Unilever famously in Indonesia, it launched single-use plastic sachets, which were great for giving shampoo or detergent to lower-income families, but the waste problem at the other end has been catastrophic, right? So it's up to these companies to develop either properly biodegradable packaging. I mean, there's some solutions like packaging made from seaweed, which could well work, but that's not quite there to scale. So the alternative is better recycling facilities. I think that these companies should absolutely help pay for. Unilever is another company that's trying to build recycling facilities for these small packaging sachets in Indonesia, but I understand that this isn't confirmed, but that they're really struggling because they just struggle to collect enough of this packaging to make these recycling plants commercially viable. So there are very these big problems in developing countries that I think that the big companies have a duty to try a lot harder to solve. So yeah, a bit of a silence. So yeah, takeaway, perhaps because we've said lots of stuff. It's been a pleasure to moderate you guys. Thanks so much. Perhaps one takeaway message in a sentence or two, something you'd like the audience to go away with. Delphine, perhaps you'd like to start.
Yeah, praise yourself for what you're doing already. Keep smiling and just keep going, inspire other people.
Awesome. Hylin?
For me, it would be never to underestimate your influence and your personal power, because no matter what or what you're doing, where you are, you definitely can influence something, somehow, someone, and it eventually multiplies.
And I'll add to that. Yeah, I'll add to all of that you can use your voice to help businesses change the way they do things. If you are silent, they assume that what they are doing is fine and that they continue doing business as usual. If they have one complaint, two complaints, or even praise, one praise, two, three, because they're doing something right, then it'll encourage them to keep doing this, and more businesses will replicate. So for all of those who've complained about the packaging and the amount of packaging used for takeaway, it's not fallen on deaf ears. It's the number one thing that businesses hear, that customers have to say negatively about their product, or positively if they see there's been a shift. So it has an impact. So continue doing it, because it helps all businesses who's working on the BYO scheme, like Helen has been doing, or the returnable packaging, not just in F&B. It helps us provide more of it, and it's thanks to you as a consumer. So don't stop.
Great stuff. Just finally from me, I'd love to see more ambitious waste reduction targets for the government, because I think that people and businesses do really listen to the government here, and it does start from the top and cascade on down. It's not all our responsibility. I do think tougher waste reduction targets would be great.
Well, thank you very much for, I think we lost Yolanda.
Oh.
Thank you very much, everyone, for this very insightful panel. Here, she's back.
Hi, Yolanda. You want to make the closure?
No, it's okay. You can.
You maybe want to share, Yolanda, the survey, the quick survey before we close up. Thank you very much, Roxanne, Eileen, Delphine, and Robin. It was great hearing from you, and I think our audience learned like many things tonight. So again, thank you. And we're going to share a quick survey for the attendees that are still connected, just for a quick feedback. And we hope to see everyone very soon, and maybe like face to face.
Yes, it'll be nice. Thank you very much.